Good morning, and welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
When the power failed at 5:12 p.m., and the whole town began to bake inside its own walls. The only cool place left in Mesa Ridge was an abandoned ice house everyone had laughed at. And the girl standing in its doorway with a ring of rusty keys was 17-year-old Lena Brooks, the same girl they had all dismissed as homeless, stubborn, and headed nowhere. This story will show you how quiet resilience, practical wisdom, and the courage to prepare before anyone believes you can turn rejection into purpose, and how the place people mock today may become the place that saves them tomorrow. Lena Brooks was 17 the summer she learned that being unwanted and being finished were not the same thing. In Mesa Ridge, Arizona, summer did not arrive gently. It pressed down. It shimmered above the highway. It baked the roofs of pickup trucks until the metal could burn skin. By late June, the air over the town looked almost solid, like the whole place had been left too close to a flame. Most people in Mesa Ridge lived by habit. They woke early, worked hard, complained about the heat, and trusted that the humming power lines and rattling air conditioners would keep doing what they had always done. Lena had once believed in that kind of ordinary life too. Then her mother died in February. And by June, even the trailer she had grown up in no longer felt like home. Her stepfather, Wade Brooks, had not become cruel all at once. That would have been easier to understand. He became practical in the coldest way possible. He began with small things. Your mother handled the bills. Lena, you're old enough to figure things out. I can't keep carrying dead weight. Then one Tuesday afternoon, while the sun burned white over the gravel yard, he said it plain. I got Carla's boys coming to stay some weekends now. There's no room. You can take what's yours by Friday. Lena stood in the kitchen with a chipped glass in her hand and said nothing. The swamp cooler rattled above them like it was tired too. On the fridge, one of her mother's old grocery lists still hung under a magnet shaped like a lemon. Milk, bread, peaches, coffee, normal words from a normal life. Wade didn't look at the list. He didn't look at Lena much either. He just set an envelope on the counter. Inside was a key ring with 3 rusted keys and a folded deed copy bearing her grandfather's name. Only thing your mama had left to pass down, he muttered. That old ice house off Miller Road. Condemned-looking dump. If you're smart, you'll sell it for scrap. Lena looked down at the keys. They were heavy. Older than anything else she owned. Her grandfather, Earl Whitaker, had died when she was 10. But she still remembered the smell of machine oil on his shirts and the way he used to say, "A building tells the truth if you stand quiet long enough." By sunset Friday, Lena had loaded everything she could fit into the back of her mother's old station wagon. 2 duffel bags, a box of books, a blanket, a coffee tin full of loose change, a framed photo of her mother laughing under a 4th of July sky, and a plastic dog bowl. The dog it belonged to, a sandy mutt named Pepper, sat in the passenger seat with one ear up, watching her like he understood that whatever came next would depend on whether she kept driving. The road to the old ice house cut beyond the gas station, past a feed store, and out toward the drier edge of town where businesses went to be forgotten. Lena had not seen the building in years. When it finally rose into view, it looked less like an inheritance and more like a warning. The white paint had long ago surrendered to dust and wind. One corner of the metal awning sagged. Windows were boarded. The sign out front hung crooked, barely readable under rust and sunburned grime. Mesa Ridge Ice in cold storage. She parked in the dirt and stepped out into the heat. The building sat low and square against the blazing sky, thick-walled and stubborn-looking, as if it had outlived several generations simply by refusing to apologize. Pepper jumped down beside her. For a long moment, Lena just stared. This is what was left. Not money, not family, not a plan. A dead building, a ring of keys, and the ugly, humiliating fact that there was nowhere else to go. She tried the first key. Nothing. The second stuck halfway. The third turned with a dry, metallic snap that echoed louder than it should have. The door dragged open. A breath of air rolled out. Not cold, but cooler. Noticeably cooler than outside. Lena froze. Inside, dust floated through long shafts of light. The concrete floor was cracked but solid. The walls were absurdly thick. Old pipe runs traced the ceiling. Shelves leaned crooked against the far end of the room. The place smelled like rust. Lime, age, and something else. Stillness. A deep, buried stillness. Pepper patted in first. Lena followed, one careful step at a time. toward the back office. She found a steel desk, an overturned chair, and a filing cabinet with one drawer stuck open. Inside were invoices, faded repair slips, and a narrow black notebook wrapped in a brittle rubber band. On the front, in small block letters, were 3 words: Earl Whitaker, Summer Notes. Lena sat down right there on the dusty floor. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first pages were full of measurements, maintenance scribbles, and sketches of vents, wall layers, and underground lines. Then, halfway down one page, she found a sentence underlined twice. When the grid fails, thick walls, shade, airflow, and stored water matter more than pride. Lena read it again, then once more. Outside, a truck roared past on Miller Road. Far off, she could hear the buzz of town life continuing without her. But inside that old building, with Pepper circling once before lying down near her knee, something shifted. Not hope. Not yet. Hope was too bright a word for what she felt. This was smaller, quieter. A thin, steady spark. The kind that begins when a person with nowhere left to stand suddenly realizes the ground under her feet may still be useful. Lena looked around the dead ice house one more time. At the thick walls, at the shadowed back rooms, at the old bones of a place everybody else had written off. Then she lowered her eyes to her grandfather's notebook and whispered the first honest thing she had said all week. Okay, show me what you saw. And without knowing it yet, Lena Brooks took the first step toward the place that would one day save more than just herself. By the next morning, Lena had dust in her hair, rust on her hands, and a decision sitting inside her chest that felt heavier than fear. She was not going to sell the ice house. She was not going to run. And she was not going to stand in that hollow, forgotten building, feeling sorry for herself until the desert swallowed the rest of her courage. If this place had once mattered to her grandfather, then she owed it one honest look before she gave up on it. The sun was already climbing when she rolled up the warped side door and let the heat creep across the concrete floor. Outside, Mesa Ridge looked the same as it always had. Pickup trucks at the diner. A church sign with peeling blue letters. A man hosing down his driveway as if water had become a habit too old to question. Inside the ice house, though, everything felt different now that Lena had read the notebook. She no longer saw wreckage. She saw clues. The thick walls were not ugly anymore. They were deliberate. The narrow vents high near the back ceiling were not random gaps. They had been placed there for a reason. Even the underground water tank her grandfather had sketched in the notes no longer sounded like a dead relic. It sounded like the beginning of an answer. Lena spent the morning opening drawers, dragging out broken crates, and sweeping years of dirt into gray piles. Pepper followed her everywhere, pausing only to sprawl in the coolest patch of floor like he had already claimed the place as home. By noon, sweat had soaked through Lena's t-shirt. Her shoulders ached. Her throat was dry. But every time she stepped outside into the punishing Arizona glare, then back into the deeper, dimmer cool of the building, she felt the same thing again. This place held, not perfectly, not magically, but honestly, it fought the heat better than it had any right to. That afternoon, she carried one of the old box fans from storage into the back office and plugged it into a working outlet she found near the breaker panel. The fan rattled, coughed, then spun to life. Warm air moved at first. Then, after she propped open the rear vent and cracked the lower side door, the room began to breathe. It was small, but it was real. Airflow, shade, retention. Exactly the things her grandfather had underlined. Around 3 o'clock, an old Ford truck pulled into the gravel lot. Lena straightened up fast, gripping the broom handle like she might need it. A wiry man climbed out slowly, one hand pressed to his lower back. He wore a faded work shirt, sun-bleached jeans, and a look that suggested disappointment came naturally to him. He stared at the building, then at Lena. "Well," he said, "either Earl Whitaker rose from the grave as a teenage girl, or somebody finally opened this place." Lena studied him for a second. "You knew my grandfather?" The man gave a dry little nod. "Name's Gus Romero. I fixed compressors in this county for 38 years. Your granddad used to call me when the old ammonia lines got moody." He glanced toward the open doorway. "Your stepdad sell it?" "He tried," Lena said. "I didn't." Gus looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable. Not rude, just measuring. Then he stepped inside. His boots echoed across the floor. He ran one hand along the wall, checked the vent opening, crouched near an old drain, and let out a low grunt that could have meant almost anything. "Most folks only see dead machinery," he said. Earl never thought like most folks. Lena held up the black notebook. I found his summer notes. At that, something changed in Gus' face. Not softness exactly. Respect. Maybe. He held out his hand. Let me see. He read in silence for a while, flipping slowly, his weathered thumb stopping on a page of measurements and arrows. Then he exhaled through his nose. He was trying to turn this place into a passive cooling shell before he got sick. Lena frowned. A what? A place that stays cooler without depending on full mechanical refrigeration. Gus said, thick envelope. Controlled airflow, shade management, maybe groundwater assist if the old tank still works. He looked up at her. Smart idea. Cheap too. If you're stubborn, a tiny smile touched Lena's mouth. I'm starting to hear that about myself. Gus almost smiled back. Almost. They spent the next 2 hours checking what still worked. Most of the old refrigeration system was too far gone to save. The pipes were corroded. The compressor housing was ruined. One section of insulation had rotted clear through, but the bones of the building were still strong. Better than strong, useful. Gus tapped the wall with his knuckles. Concrete block, filled and layered. Hold steady. That matters. He pointed at the roofline. Needs reflective coating, then toward the side yard. You get scrap lumber and shade cloth up over that west face, you cut a good chunk of afternoon gain. He said it all in the tone of a man discussing fence posts or tire pressure. Plain, practical, but to Lena, every sentence felt like someone taking her fear seriously and handing it back in a form she could actually work with. By evening, she had a list. Clean vents, seal gaps, check tank, paint roof, salvage shelving. Set up one habitable room first. When Gus climbed back into his truck, he rested one arm on the open window. I'm not promising miracles, he said. I'm not asking for one, Lena replied. He gave a short nod. Good. Miracles make people lazy. Work keeps them alive. Then he drove off in a cloud of pale dust. As the sun dropped lower, Lena sat on the front step of the Icehouse with Pepper's head resting across her boot. Across the road, 2 teenagers slowed in a pickup just enough to stare and laugh. One of them shouted, "You really living in that freezer tomb?" Lena said nothing. She just looked back at the building behind her, at the thick walls holding the day's heat at bay, at the notebook in her lap, at the list in her hand. For the first time since Wade told her to leave, she did not feel like a girl standing outside her own life. She felt like someone standing at the rough beginning of it, and somewhere under the grief, under the anger, under the humiliation of being cast out, something steadier was taking shape. Not revenge, not yet victory, just purpose, quiet, stubborn, and beginning to breathe. 3 days later, the Icehouse no longer looked abandoned. It still looked old, still rough, still like the kind of place most people in Mesa Ridge would drive past without slowing down. But it no longer looked dead. Lena had swept out 2 more rooms, cleared the back corridor, and dragged enough broken shelving into neat piles to make the place feel less like a ruin and more like a project with a pulse. The west wall now held the first stretch of shade cloth Gus helped her rig from salvaged lumber and metal hooks. The roof had one fresh patch of bright white coating that caught the sun so hard it almost hurt to look at. And down in the old utility room, after 2 hours of stubborn effort and a wrench that kept slipping in her hand, Lena had managed to get water moving through one of the backup lines. Not much, but enough to matter. Every evening, when the sun leaned low and the desert finally loosened its grip a little, she would sit on an overturned milk crate with her grandfather's notebook in her lap and read by flashlight. Airflow, shade timing, thermal lag, stored water. The words sounded technical on the page, but inside that building, they felt personal, like her grandfather had left behind more than instructions, like he had left behind a way of thinking, a way of noticing. That was the week the birds began falling. Not in dramatic flocks, not enough to make the evening news. Just one sparrow near the gas station, a dove under the bank's drive-through sign, then 2 blackbirds on the shoulder of Route 18, their wings spread awkwardly in the dust. By Friday, the heat had settled over Mesa Ridge like a lid. Even the mornings felt wrong. At 8 o'clock, the air was already hot enough to blur the mountains in the distance. People moved faster from door to car to store, store to house. No one lingered. No one laughed outside. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. Gus arrived just before noon with a box fan, 3 old thermometers, and the expression of a man who trusted bad weather more than good promises. He hung 1 thermometer in the back hall, 1 near the front office, and 1 outside in the shade. By mid-afternoon, The difference between them made him mutter something low under his breath. "What?" Lena asked. Gus squinted at the numbers. Your granddad knew exactly what he was doing. Outside, the shaded thermometer read 112. Inside the back hall, it was nearly 15 degrees cooler. Not comfortable, not easy, but survivable. That word stayed with Lena. Survivable. She heard it again an hour later when Marisol Vega came over carrying a grocery sack with 2 cans of peaches and a loaf of bread her aunt had sent. Marisol was 11, narrow-shouldered, curious, and serious in the way some children become when life makes them pay attention too early. She had an inhaler clipped to the pocket of her denim shorts and a habit of looking adults straight in the eye when they spoke. "My aunt said you probably forgot to eat," she said, setting the bag down on the work table. "I didn't forget," Lena replied. Marisol looked around at the half-clean room. "You definitely forgot." Lena laughed before she meant to. It surprised both of them. Marisol wandered to the back hall, then stopped. "It's cooler in here." "A little?" The girl nodded slowly. "My room gets scary hot in the afternoon." Lena's smile faded. She glanced at the inhaler. Marisol saw her looking. "Sometimes I'm okay," she said. "Sometimes I'm not." That night, Lena pulled weather maps up on her phone using the weak signals she got near the front door. She read articles she barely understood at first, then read them again until the meaning sharpened. A stationary high-pressure dome, extreme overnight heat retention, peak electrical demand risk, grid strain warnings in 2 neighboring counties. She stared at the screen, then at her grandfather's notes spread open beside her. For the first time, the notebook stopped feeling like a relic. It felt like a warning. The next morning, she drove into town and tried to say it out loud. First to Pastor Naomi Reed, who was unloading bottled water at the church pantry. Then to Deputy Evan Cole, who stood outside the sheriff's annex wiping sweat from the back of his neck. She told them the heat was building wrong, that the nights weren't cooling off enough, that if the power failed, even for a few hours, the older folks in town and the little kids would be trapped in houses built to hold air conditioning, not survive without it. Pastor Naomi listened carefully, truly listened, but Evan gave her the same patient look adults gave teenagers when they wanted to be kind without taking them seriously. "We've had outages before," he said. "The utility company always gets things back up. This isn't just an outage," Lena said. "Not if it hits during the peak." He folded his arms. "And you know that from fixing up an old ice house." Lena felt the heat rise in her face. From paying attention, he did not laugh. That almost made it worse. He just nodded once, like he was ending a conversation with someone earnest and mistaken. By late afternoon, the humiliation sat in her chest like a stone. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe grief had turned caution into obsession. Maybe being thrown out had made her so desperate to make this place matter that she was inventing danger where there wasn't any. Then, just after 6, Marisol showed up at the side door pale and breathing too fast. One hand clutching her inhaler, the other pressed against her ribs. Her aunt was behind her, panicked, saying the apartment's air unit had cut out again. Lena got them inside, into the coolest back room. Within minutes, the girl's breathing began to ease, not because of medicine alone, because the room itself was helping her body stop fighting the air. That was the moment something hardened inside Lena. Not fear, not pride, certainty. This was no longer about proving a point to a town that didn't want one. It was about being ready anyway. That night, under the yellow light of a battery lantern, Lena found a piece of plywood, painted it white, and wrote in thick black letters, "If the power goes out, come here." Then she leaned it against the front wall of the old ice house and stood back, staring at the words in the deepening dark. The highway hummed in the distance. The desert held its breath. And Lena Brooks, 17 years old and no longer asking permission to be believed, began preparing for the day Mesa Ridge would need the place everyone had mocked. The outage began at 5:12 in the evening, not with thunder, not with sirens, not with anything dramatic enough to warn people what it would become. Just a hard little click somewhere beyond town. Then a silence so complete it felt unnatural. The fans stopped first, then the window units, then the grocery store signs, the gas station lights, the church office printer, the diner's ice machine, the pharmacy cooler, the buzz of ordinary life that people never notice until it disappears. For one strange second, Mesa Ridge seemed to pause. Then the heat moved in. Lena was in the front room of the ice house when it happened, stacking bottled water and milk crates and checking the old battery lanterns for the 3rd time. She looked up the moment the overhead bulb died. Pepper lifted his head. The box fan wound down into stillness, and in that instant, Lena knew this was it. She was already moving before fear had time to catch up. She ran to the side door, shoved it open, and looked across Miller Road toward town. Nothing. No neon. No traffic light at the intersection. No hum from the strip mall at the edge of the highway. Just a wavering sheet of desert heat under the lowering sun. Gus's truck came flying into the lot in a cloud of pale dust. He stepped out fast, face set hard. Substation tripped, he said. Utility crews overwhelmed. Neighboring county took a hit too. How long? He looked at her. That's not the question. Lena swallowed, because she knew what he meant. The question was not how long the power would stay off. The question was how long the town could last without it. By 5:30, the first car pulled in. It was Marisol's aunt, one hand on the wheel, the other waving frantically through the windshield. Marisol climbed out looking flushed and fragile, holding her inhaler tight against her chest. Lena took her inside without a word. The back room, with its thick walls and dim filtered air, still held the cool it had gathered through the day. Not cold, but safe. That mattered more. After that, people started coming in twos and threes. An elderly couple from Juniper Street, a mother carrying a baby with damp curls stuck to his forehead, a teenager helping his grandfather walk. Then Pastor Naomi's van rolled up loaded with bottled water, folding chairs, and 3 women from the church pantry. She climbed out, saw the people already gathering inside, and gave Lena a look that held no surprise now. Only urgency. Tell me where you need me. The next hour passed in pieces. Lena assigned rooms without ever deciding to become the kind of person who gave orders. Children and older folks in the coolest back hall, people with breathing issues near the utility room where the air stayed steadier, water along the west wall, wet towels in plastic bins, lanterns spaced low and far apart to preserve battery, Pastor Naomi calming frightened children, Gus checking vents, doors, and airflow every 15 minutes like a man guarding a dam, and Lena walking, answering, lifting, listening, thinking, always thinking. Outside, the heat turned vicious. Without air conditioning, homes became ovens by slow degrees. Drywall sweated warmth. Bedrooms trapped stale air. Cars sitting in driveways became unbearable in minutes. Word spread faster than cell service could keep up. The old Icehouse on Miller Road. Go there. It's cooler there. Just after sunset, Deputy Evan Cole arrived in his cruiser with 2 elderly women in the back seat and a teenage boy in the front. His uniform shirt was dark with sweat. His face had changed. The easy doubt was gone. I'm doing street checks, he said. People are dropping hard in the east trailers. He looked around the crowded room, then back at Lena. You were right. Lena didn't answer. There was no room inside her for vindication, only motion. Bring the worst cases straight to the rear hall, she said, and tell people not to wait until they feel faint. He nodded once and turned back toward the door. By 8 o'clock, the Icehouse was full, not packed beyond reason, but full enough that every quiet voice mattered, full enough that every cup of water mattered, full enough that every degree of trapped cool inside those concrete walls felt like borrowed mercy. Then Clint Danner came. He did not come looking like the smug man who had laughed at Lena from the polished doorway of his convenience store. He came carrying his mother. Her face was ashy. Her lips were dry. And panic had stripped something clean off him. The generator failed, he said, breathless. Store got too hot. She nearly passed out. For one suspended second, Lena saw everything at once. His old smirk, his careless jokes, the way he had called this place a freezer tomb, the way the town had looked through her like she was some stubborn little stray. Then she saw his mother, a frightened old woman trying not to collapse in his arms. And that was the end of the decision. Back room, Lena said. Now, Clint stared at her as if he had expected anger, or maybe deserved it. But Lena had crossed too far into responsibility to reach for revenge. Marisol, pale but steadier now, lifted a damp towel from the bin and held it out without being asked. Pastor Naomi guided Clint's mother to a chair. Gus adjusted the vent. Deputy Cole came back with more people. And through it all, Lena kept moving. Not like a girl proving a point, like a young woman holding a line. By full dark, the building had become what her grandfather must have once imagined, a shelter, a cooling place. A stubborn square of survival in a town built to depend on comfort it no longer had. And as Lena stood in the doorway for one brief second, looking at the rows of people resting against thick walls everyone had once mocked, She understood something with a clarity that almost hurt. The worst moment of her life had not thrown her away. It had led her here, to the one place in Mesa Ridge that was ready when everything else failed. By morning, the worst of the heat had not fully passed. But the town had. Mesa Ridge looked different in the early light. Not ruined, not broken beyond repair, just humbled. The kind of humbled that settles over people when something they trusted without question suddenly fails them. And something they mocked quietly keeps standing. The power was still out in parts of town. The grocery store sat dark. The diner was serving coffee from a propane burner out back. Porch doors stood open all along Juniper Street, with blankets pinned over windows to keep out the rising sun. And at the old Icehouse on Miller Road, people were still sleeping against the cool, concrete walls, their breathing slow and steady, their paper cups half full beside them. Lena had not slept more than an hour. Her legs ached. Her head throbbed. There was dust on her jeans, dried salt on her shirt, and a long streak of white roof sealant still caught near one wrist. She looked tired enough to fold in half. But when she stepped outside with a clipboard and a case of bottled water, she no longer looked like the girl Wade had pushed out of a trailer with nowhere to go. She looked like she belonged somewhere. Gus was already out front, leaning against his truck with a thermos in one hand. "You kept them alive," he said. Lena glanced back toward the building. "We all did." He gave one slow nod. That was his version of deep praise. Inside, Pastor Naomi was helping a little boy find his shoes. Marisol was sitting up now, color back in her face, carefully folding damp towels into a neat stack like she had appointed herself assistant manager of the whole place. Deputy Evan Cole came through the front door carrying a box of electrolyte packets and a face full of apology. "The county finally sent support trucks," he said. "Cooling buses, too. Utility says rolling restoration by tonight. Maybe sooner on the west side." Lena set down the water. "That's good." Evan hesitated, then he stepped a little closer and lowered his voice. "I should have listened to you sooner." Lena looked at him. He was not speaking like a deputy now. Not like a man trying to save face, just like a tired human being telling the truth. "You listened when it counted," she said. He exhaled, almost relieved she had given him a way to stand inside his own regret. Around noon, Clint Danner arrived again, but this time he was not carrying his mother. He was carrying tools, a shovel, 2 work lights, extra extension cords, and 3 unopened cases of water from his store. He set them down near the doorway and cleared his throat. "I was wrong about this place," he said. Then, after a pause that cost him something, "I was wrong about you too." Lena did not answer right away. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she wanted to make him squirm, but because some apologies deserve a little silence before they are received. Finally, she nodded toward the supply wall. "We need help setting up a second rest area in the side room." Clint nodded once and got to work. No speech, no excuses, just work. And maybe that was enough. By late afternoon, the first low buzz of returning electricity rippled through parts of Mesa Ridge. A few people clapped when someone's phone charger lit up. Others cried quietly from pure exhaustion. But even as life began to restart, no one hurried away from the Icehouse as fast as they had come. They lingered. They swept floors. They restocked water. They repaired a loose hinge. They asked Gus questions. They asked Lena more. "How did you know? What made this place stay cooler? Can we help fix it up for real? Can this become a town shelter?" That was when Lena finally understood the deepest part of what had happened. The Icehouse had not only protected the town, it had changed it. Before that night, people in Mesa Ridge believed safety came from money, convenience, newer buildings, stronger machines. Now they knew something harder and truer. Safety also came from paying attention, from preparing early, from respecting heat, limits, and each other. From the kind of quiet wisdom that does not look impressive, until the day it saves lives. As the sun lowered, Pastor Naomi brought out a folding table and set a handwritten sign on it. "Mesa Ridge Community Cooling Shelter. Volunteer sign up." People lined up to write their names. Lena stood a few feet away, watching them. For a moment, she thought of her mother, of the lemon-shaped fridge magnet, of the life that had broken apart so quickly she had barely had time to understand she was losing it. Then she thought of the first day she opened the Icehouse door and felt that small pocket of cooler air touch her face. Back then, she had believed she was walking into the leftovers of someone else's life. Now she knew better. She had been walking into her own, not the life she would have chosen, but perhaps the one that had been waiting for her all along. A place to stand, a place to matter, A place where the pain that nearly buried her had been turned, somehow, into shelter for other people. That evening, when the building was quieter and the worst had finally passed, Lena sat on the front step with Pepper pressed against her leg and Marisol beside her, swinging her feet. The sky over Mesa Ridge had softened into gold. For the first time in days, the wind felt almost gentle, and Lena, with dust on her hands and purpose in her heart, looked at the old sign above the door and smiled. Not because everything was fixed, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because she had learned something many people spend a lifetime missing. Being cast out does not mean you have no value. Sometimes it means you are being pushed toward the very place where your strength will matter most. And maybe that is the question this story leaves with all of us. When life shuts one door in the hardest way possible, do we only mourn what we lost? Or do we dare to build something strong enough to shelter someone else? If this story moved you, and if you believe quiet courage still matters in this world, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story.